Good afternoon. This presentation, I apologise in advance, is PowerPoint 1987. I am terrible at doing decks. It's a bad start and it gets worse. So my background is mostly in An Garda Síochána, where I spent 10 years as a system administrator and 12 as a cybercrime investigator. And I'm currently Director of Forensics at ComSec and rubbish at doing PowerPoints. Apologies, first unsolicited dick pic of the day. So, digital forensics use cases. Obviously, we have criminal investigations, we have all sorts of other incidents where forensics become important or necessary. Mostly the data breaches, recent times, a lot of insider threats with the work from home. During the COVID pandemic, we've had situations where we're starting to see a lot of forensics cases coming through from where either supervisors were working from home and the people they were supervising weren't, or vice versa. And things obviously gone a bit wrong. So there are many, many use cases for digital forensics. I suppose the one that everybody's thought about is criminal investigations where everything's going to court and it has to be for delivery of a court case, but that isn't necessarily the case. A lot of places just want to know what happened. I may not want anybody to know about it, but they do want to know for their own purposes what went on. There's a massive amount of tools. Apologies if this is a bit small because there are a lot of them. There are thousands of tools that are used in forensic investigations, from suites like Encase, which try to do the whole thing, down to little tools which do one specific job, like maybe examining a particular portion of a Windows registry or whatever it might be, log analysis tools. There's a lot of overlap between forensics tools and normal Windows applications. So like hackers live off the land, so too do forensic analysts at times. The point is that there's a massive array of tools, and you have to kind of know which ones you're going to use for which specific job. With that said, there's a very simplified workflow in forensics where you have an incident and you rush out to preserve and collect the evidence that you are going to need to find out what went on. You're going to examine it and decide what parts of it are of use to you, what parts aren't relevant. You're going to analyse the bits that you've decided are useful, and you're going to report what happened. And that's at a very, very simple level. There's obviously, in some cases, an awful lot more to it than that. Law enforcement is, I suppose, where we mostly think of forensics being used, because it's the one that hits the news most of the time, and they have their own issues. So they have larger data sets year on year. Every time they're going out doing searches, they're finding more data because drives are bigger. There are more drives in computers. There are more devices. You went into a premises maybe 15 years ago, you might find a computer. Now you're finding 3 or 4 mobile devices, tablets, 4 or 5 laptops, whatever it might be. There are obviously storage requirements in law enforcement for those. When you gather it, you have to store it somewhere. And that becomes an issue. One of the things that law enforcement is very slow about, because government agencies, they have longer procurement processes, they have tighter budgets, they're competing with other departments for budget, and all of that can cause issues. Global cases are a big issue that, as has been said before, I think it was Mikko said it this morning, geography has been taken out of the equation. And you could be dealing with an incident that spans 4 or 5 different legal jurisdictions. That becomes an issue. But the one thing that law enforcement does have that doesn't affect industry is that they're prepared. They have everything in place for dealing with forensic incidents because they're planning them. They're going out and getting a warrant. They know where they're searching. They kind of know what they're looking for. They pretty much know what they're going to get and what they're going to do with it. So they don't have some of the issues that industry have. In industry, again, you've got the large data sets, you've got cloud usage, you've got tons of apps that people might be using throughout the business. one of the big ones there is lack of evidence sources. You think that you can find out everything that's been happening on your environment, but maybe you're missing evidence in that for a lot of organizations, for cost reasons, they perhaps won't buy logging, or they'll have restricted logging or less logging, maybe logging over 5 days, maybe over 30, for cost purposes. So one of the issues that you have for forensics in industry is you go in and find out that some of your evidence is gone. Qualified personnel are not always in-house, and incidents do arise very, very suddenly, unlike law enforcement. It can happen, and usually will, at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon of a bank holiday weekend when you're just about to head off camping for the weekend. And another issue that tends to cause a lot of legal head-scratching in industry is the use of dual-use devices, bring your own device. If you're investigating an incident that has a dual-use device where somebody's been accessing company data legitimately on the device and also using it for personal purposes, you now have to skirt around potentially intimate information that might be on that device. And that can cause a lot of head-scratching and slow things down. Now, in forensics, there are a number of things that take an awful long time. Identification of your evidence sources in a large operation can take quite some time. Gaining access to them, like who has access to this particular server or this particular instance. If we gather it, where are we going to store it? Setting up that storage, what are we going to examine it with? With forensic tools, you can't just go out and use them. You've got to verify them because you need to know your results from them are, what you see is actually what happened. So you just have to verify them. You've got to allocate out roles, who's going to do what. The ones I have involved there are all ones which can be done in advance, which is what we're talking about today, which is forensic readiness planning. And I've highlighted those ones there, which they are quite time-consuming, but don't necessarily have to be done when the incident pops up. Forensic readiness gets a call out in the new ISO 27001, which just came out this month. And if you look in the 27002 document for that, they have a nice little synopsis of what forensic readiness is and what you should be doing. ISACA also have their own definition of it. The UK Ministry of Defence require it for all their IT teams. It absolutely must be written into the incident response plans for those teams. So when you go into an investigation, your initial questions are, where is our data? Who has access to it? Do we have all the data we need? How long are we retaining it for? Because retention periods may, if you've low retention period on a particular set of data, you may have to prioritize that above something which would otherwise be a bit more important. How do we get it? Who's going to do it? And where are we going to put it? And that can be the hardest one. Where are we going to put it? It's huge. It's terabytes. So these, I would say, are tasks that you don't want to leave until your busiest time. When you're in the middle of an incident and you're trying to figure out what is going on in your environment, the last thing you need to be doing is identifying where everything is, allocating out roles, setting up the hardware and the software that you're going to be using, identifying which tools you're going to need, where you're going to get them, verifying them, setting up documentation like chain of custody logs, labeling receipts, and all that good stuff. So some practical measures that can be taken, which mean that those items are done prior to any given incident. And the top one, and this comes up, if you look in a lot of the standards, for example, 27001 and NIST, information asset register. Know where your assets are. Know who has ownership of them, what their retention times are, and whether or not you're logging them. An incident response plan, which is a requirement in a lot of organizations, but very often doesn't reach down into the levels of detail that you require for forensics. It kind of says, we get to this point and then so-and-so is in charge of forensics, but doesn't give any detail as to what that process would or would not look like. So, excuse me just a second. Preparation of documentation. You can set up all your case management, all your procedural documents, all your labeling, define your communications process. All this can be done prior to any incident happening. And the point of this, exercising as well, gets you through all that process and finds the gaps in it and finds out where you're missing evidence. But the point of this is that you can do this in an organization and be ready for an incident, or when the incident breaks out, you can be paying over the odds for a consultant to come in and do it for you and missing the first couple of days of your response doing stuff that could have been done in advance. Which brings us to a slightly different workflow where the readiness goes in at the beginning, and when the incident kicks off, the preservation, collection, examination and analysis are expedited. They don't take as long to do and they're more complete. You're not missing anything. You already know where all your sources are and what's important and how to get them. The benefits: quicker, much more efficient response. Quicker to identify the attack vectors. If it's an ongoing attack, you're getting in there and finding out much quicker what's actually going on your systems. You're less likely, if you're following a process, to inadvertently damage evidence. You're not going to take the wrong steps, accidentally delete something or fail to collect something and not be able to get it back later on. The lower cost. I would say that logging is so important that if you're making a saving by not logging, it's a false saving, because the cost when it comes to an incident of not being able to determine through the logs what happened is going to be the cost of actually going and doing forensics on all the affected boxes to find out what happened on them, which is a much longer and more expensive process. And again, on the costs, because you completed it beforehand, you're not in a position where you're paying somebody else to do it for you at incident response rates, emergency rates, which can be quite high. The other main point of it is, if you have this planned in advance and you know where your evidence sources are, you've less disruption to the normal business. The normal business can potentially continue without being disrupted by the investigation, because people know what they're looking for, where to get it, and ideally where to get it without interrupting somebody else's day. You can detect threats earlier because you're actually responding a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently. You can deter insider threats because, as everybody knows, there's nothing quite like an audit log to make people think before they go and do something. There are a couple of prime examples of that around the place. In my last career, it was regular that at least once a year there would be a report out on the number of people who had misused certain systems and being detected by audit logs and being disciplined as a result. That is a great deterrence to people, particularly insider threats. And forensics readiness then also allows you to demonstrate high standards for compliance. So when the regulator comes around and says, well, you know, what are your systems? Are they good enough, or have you been actually negligent here? You can show that, no, we weren't negligent. We were prepared. We're prepared as best we could be to respond as well as we possibly could. I seem to have flying through that. You'd be glad to hear. So thank you. Nice. So, if anybody has any questions, oh dear.
Thank you. What's your password? No, I'm sorry. Getting into incident response, how would you recommend someone does it? What's the skill set you'd be looking for? It sounds like perhaps you were trained up in the police, but it sounds like an exciting, interesting sort of discipline. How does one jump in?
my pathway is not particularly standard. I went from the police into cybercrime investigation and into forensics that way, and from there into incident response. And very often the pathway is slightly different in that somebody will come from maybe SOC analysis into incident response and on to forensics from there. There are many different pathways. It's like, there are so many different environments, so many different ways of working around the place. You can pretty much, you can go in as a generalist, or you can go in as a specialist, and you can broaden out. But there are many ways. There's no one set way. My way is probably a little bit weirder than most.
So yeah, that was a great talk. I thought it was very informative with the forensic readiness and such. Like, I'm researching into this area myself because I'm getting into it, but I've noticed that forensics been around for a while, the actual issue itself, and it strived from law and someone died, and then it evolved into computer science and all this. But what I've noticed is there's no framework as per se to kind of be like, right, there's the bread and butter, go ahead and find it. So I'm very interested looking at that new ISO standard, or the one that you just referenced there in your slides, to check out that, to kind of get a holistic view, you know what I mean? Because for people coming into the industry, they're probably trying to think, right, what tools, what procedures, what documentation, what process, what kind of where should I look? Because when you're looking at forensic analysis, at autopsy, FTK, or whatever, OS forensic, anything, it's very hard to kind of get lost in terms of the documentation and what you need to go and the right path you need to go at when you're analysing data before the recovery phase and all that. So, I just thought you might have noticed that yourself in the industry.
So again, with this industry, there with the technology sector, there are so many different ways of doing the one thing. And some people will go all out open source. Some people will go with a closed system. Some people will prefer a particular type of environment, and others will go a completely opposite direction. Forensics is the same. There are people who focus in on a particular tool and a particular workflow and like to follow that. And there are people then who will go with a completely different one. You mentioned autopsy there, which is excellent and open source and a great way of, I suppose, building up skills in that area. And it has a very nice workflow to it. But some people would not like that at all. There are also then multiple tools for example, mobile devices, which look completely different and have a completely different feel to them. So it's there's no one set way of doing it. And the same thing applies to standards. You've got your ISO 27001. You also have your NIST. You have, as many standards as you like. And it's basically pick what suits your particular needs at that time. A little bit of research, decide what you want and what suits you, and go for that and bone up in it.
Hi.
Templates can be, I suppose, Google is your friend for a start, but what you want is to get something that you can customize for your own particular needs without breaching anybody's rights. So you're looking for something that somebody is actually letting you customize, giving out for free. So there are a lot of organizations that do things like that. For example, organizations like, and this is not specifically about templates for forensics or anything, but organizations such as Enterprise Ireland will have templates for various different things which they put out. A lot of the UK government organizations have templates. The NCSC in the UK and here would have templates and, I suppose, advice on how to go through certain things. And if they allow those documents to be used, then you're within your rights to use them as, for your own purposes.
Hi there. I'm just curious, as somebody who's worked in the Gardaí and now in forensics and incident response, what's your recommendation to general industry around, how to walk that line around, when an incident and when to bring in the outside forces.
Yeah, so I would say let them know as early as possible. They may know something about it that could be of use to you. So this is not just about reporting so that the guards know where to put their resources and all that sort of stuff. But they could be dealing with 4 or 5 other businesses that are in the same position as you, under an attack from the same group, where they found out something that might be of use to you.
I suppose the counter to it is the fear of the systems being seized or interrupting business and things like that.
Okay, so there's a long-standing, I suppose we can nearly call it a tradition at this stage, but a practice of never, if at all possible, damaging a running business. Even to the point where if a business is suspected of criminal activity and are being searched under warrant, if they're a running concern, they, like a person, are innocent until proven guilty. And there is very little chance that their systems are going to be picked up and carried out the door and then put out of business. It simply isn't the practice. So there's no downside to reporting that I know of.
I think we have one more question.
Hi. So first off, really interesting talk. I suppose with regards to, have you seen yourself maybe in the last 10, 15 years or so, traditionally forensics and investigations would take place with on-premises data, but obviously with, I suppose, so many companies moving to the cloud, have you seen different challenges, if you have to investigate, if there's a forensics case with data stored in the cloud, it might be a company based in Europe, but they have data located in the US with regards to different jurisdictions. Is there a lot other, I suppose, different challenges with regards to that, and how do you navigate that?
Okay, so it is a challenge. It's something that has changed massively over the years. So that and encryption are probably the 2 biggest challenges to forensic investigations, because previously you seized a box, there was a hard drive in it, you imaged it, you did a hash of it, and it was never going to change, and you could prove somebody else could come along and hash that drive and get exactly the same value. You're not going to be able to do that with volatile data like cloud data or indeed mobile data. So what you have to do is just do a best effort at getting the data at the time and then hash it so that you can at least show that, that copy of it that you have, if you give a copy of it to somebody else, that they get the same hash in it, that it is the same data that you're giving evidence that you obtained from this particular source, whatever that might be. It's slightly different, but you still do your best effort. The same thing would apply to a mobile device. If you go in to do an imaging of a mobile device and you image the same mobile device tomorrow, you're going to get a completely different hash because you actually have to analyze the device while it's live. Things are changing on it. It's never the same again. So those are challenges, but they're not insurmountable. You just document what you do, and that's the most important thing in forensics, is you document absolutely every step you take, so that if you're challenged later on, that you're not trying to recall, oh God, I would have done it this way, or I probably did it that way. You can say, no, I did it exactly 1, 2, 3. Thank you.